The universe is not empty. It is not silent. It is holding its breath. For 10,000 years, the Galactic Synod believed they were the masters of the void. They believed that civilization was a straight line, from primitive savagery to enlightened stagnation. They looked at the stars and saw only resources to be claimed. They looked at young worlds and saw only subjects to be ruled. They made a calculation. A simple risk assessment. They found a noisy, chaotic blue world in the backwaters of the Orion Arm. A world of unstable tectonics, virulent diseases, and a species that spent its entire history fighting itself. The Synod saw a fractured people. They saw an easy conquest. They sent their invincible fleets to pacify the locals. They expected surrender. They expected fear. Instead, they found out why the dark forest stays quiet. If you think you know how an alien invasion story ends, think again. This isn't a story about how we survived. This is the story of how we made them regret ever learning our coordinates. Before we unleash the kinetic bombardment, do me a favor. If you love stories where humanity refuses to go quietly into the night, smash that like button. It helps charge the main cannons. Make sure you're subscribed and have that notification bell rung so you never miss a deployment from the Terran Defense Force. Now, let's open the history books to the chapter titled Regret. The Grand Chamber of the Orcs Synod was designed to make you feel small. It was a cathedral of light and sound, grown from living crystal over millennia, orbiting a dying red giant star. The air inside always smelled of ozone and ancient dust, the scent of unshakable power. Here, the High Council decided the fate of star systems with the casual indifference of a gardener pruning a hedge. High Chancellor HFY sat upon the central dais. He was a luminary, a being of pure photovoltaic energy encased in ornate, shifting geometric plates. Usually his glow was a steady, reassuring gold. Today, it flickered with the staccato rhythm of panic. A nervous violet hue bled into his aura. "Order," HFY whispered. His voice was amplified by the chamber's acoustics, booming like thunder, yet lacking its usual authority. "I demand order in the Synod." The murmurs of the delegates did not subside. The aquatic xylosians were thrashing nervously in their suspension tanks, sending ripples through the water. The insectoid KK clicked their mandibles in a deafening cacophony of distress. The air was thick with pheromones, sharp, acrid scents that signaled biological terror across a dozen different species. "We are the masters of the arm," HFY roared, his light flaring to a blinding white to silence the room. "Why do we cower like hatchlings? We control the hyperlanes. We police the warp. Explain this hysteria." From the shadows of the lower tier, a hoverpod drifted forward. It belonged to Operative Kalen of the Zephyr Intelligence Directorate. The Zephyr were the Council's spies, slender, gray-skinned, with large, wet eyes adapted for the ultraviolet spectrum. Kalen looked unwell. His uniform was disheveled, and he kept glancing at the ceiling of the impenetrable station as if expecting the roof to tear open at any second. "High Chancellor," Kalen's voice was thin, trembling. "With respect, we are not cowering without cause. We are cowering because the 7th Pacification Fleet has ceased to exist." The chamber went deathly silent. Even the bubbling of the xylosian tank stopped. "Ceased to exist?" HFY scoffed, though his light dimmed perceptibly. The Kravash Ascendancy sent 3 dreadnoughts to Sector ZZ9. A primitive system. The inhabitants are barely Class 1. They burn dead plants for energy. They use chemical explosives to propel metal slugs. It was a routine annexation. "It was supposed to be," Kalen agreed, his fingers dancing over a holographic console on his pod. A massive map materialized in the center of the room. It showed the edge of the galaxy, a dark, unexplored region. A red blinking light pulsed over a small yellow sun. The Kravash fleet entered the system 3 cycles ago. They broadcast the standard decree of submission. They expected the primitives to bow. It is the natural order. Kalen swiped his hand and the hologram changed. It showed a telemetry readout, a chaotic mess of static and garbled data. Instead, Kalen continued, the primitives responded with a signal. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a digital image. "Show us," HFY commanded. The hologram flickered and resolved. It was crude, pixelated 2D data. It showed a human hand curled into a fist with the middle finger extended. A gasp ran through the assembly. Some of the more sensitive telepathic species recoiled as if struck. "Following this transmission," Kalen said, his voice dropping to a whisper, the Kravash fleet engaged. They targeted the planet's major population centers with plasma bombardment. Standard shock and awe. But the telemetry indicates something impossible. The primitives didn't scatter. They didn't retreat to their caves. Kalen paused, swallowing hard, his large eyes wide with disbelief. They engaged the fleet in the atmosphere. Their aircraft. Chancellor, they violate the safety limits of biological tolerance. They pulled maneuvers that subjected their pilots to 9 gs of force. A G-force that would liquefy a Zephyr's internal organs. And they didn't stop. They swarmed the dreadnoughts like viral agents. Swarmed? Bewire asked, leaning forward. With what? Sticks and stones? With missiles, Kalen whispered. Nuclear-tipped kinetic missiles. Dirty. Crude. Radiant. But effective. They overwhelmed the point defense lasers by sheer volume. They didn't care about accuracy. They cared about saturation. They drowned the targeting computers in noise. Bewire leaned back, his plates shifting with a metallic rasp. So they damaged a ship. The Kravash are warriors. They would repair and retaliate. There is no retaliation, Chancellor, Kalen said grimly. Because 12 hours after the engagement began, the Kravash flagship, the World Breaker, stopped transmitting. The last data packet we received was a frantic audio log from Warlord Grom. Play it, Vwire ordered. The room filled with the sound of static, screaming, and the tearing of metal. It sounded like the inside of a grinder. Then Grom's voice, usually a deep, terrifying growl that made lesser species weep, cut through. It sounded broken. They are boarding us. By the void, they are inside the walls. The plasma casters are too slow. They move too fast. Their weapons, solid slugs. They punch through the bioarmor like it's paper. Send reinforcements. Send. The audio cut out with the sound of a loud, mechanical crunch, the unmistakable sound of a kinetic shotgun racking a shell. Then a human voice, distorted and synthesized, spoke a single word over the dying warlord's comms. Clear. Kalen looked up at the terrified council. That was 2 days ago. Since then we have lost contact with the listening posts in the adjacent sectors. They are not just defending their rock, Chancellor. They are coming out. And they are using our own ships to do it. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. The council looked at the red dot on the map. It was no longer a target. It was an eye opening in the dark. The silence of the conclave was shattered by the rhythmic humming of the medical transport. Warlord Grom was a legend among the stars. A Kravash warrior who stood 8 feet tall, covered in natural armor plating that could deflect laser fire. He had conquered a dozen worlds. He had never known defeat. Now he looked small. His compound eyes were dilated, darting frantically around the room. His mandibles clicked in a rhythmic, soothing pattern, a regression to a larval state of distress. Warlord, Vuer said, his voice softening, trying to regain some semblance of control. You are safe here. Speak. Tell us of the enemy. Grom stopped clicking. He focused on the light of the Chancellor. Safe? He rasped, his voice like grinding stones. There is no safe. Not from them. They are biological abominations. Explain, Vwire pressed. We know they are hardy. High-gravity world. Dense bones. We have the biology reports. It is not their bones. Grom roared, straining against the restraints so hard the metal groaned. It is their blood. Do you know what they have in their blood, Chancellor? He looked around the room, his eyes wide with the memory of trauma. They call it adrenaline. A murmur of confusion went through the room. The council species were evolved from cooperative, symbiotic ancestors. They had hormones for bonding, for logic, for mating. They did not have hormones for murder. It is a combat drug, Grom whispered. A chemical weapon. We have outlawed similar compounds in the galactic conventions. But these humans, they manufacture it in their own glands. Instantly. On command. Grom shuddered, a spasm of terror rippling through his massive frame. I saw a human soldier, a female, small, unarmored. I shot her. A plasma bolt to the shoulder. It should have been fatal. It should have induced shock and coma. That is the biological law. When a body is damaged, it shuts down to preserve energy. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a terrified hiss. She did not go into a coma. He accelerated. Her pupils dilated until her eyes were black pits. Her heart rate tripled. She ignored the pain. She ignored the damage. She lifted a piece of hull debris that weighed 3 times her body mass and threw it at me. She was screaming, but it wasn't a scream of pain. It was a scream of fury. She wanted to kill me more than she wanted to live. This is impossible, a scientist from the Unity grid interjected from his floating sphere. Biological systems require shutdown protocols to prevent catastrophic failure. An organism cannot function past critical damage. They don't have shutdown protocols. Grum snapped. They have override protocols. They break their own bones to hit you harder. They tear their own muscles to run faster. They are monsters. And their tactics. Grum laughed, a dry, hacking sound that chilled the room. We fight for territory. We fight for resources. We have rules of engagement. We do not target civilians. We do not use excessive force. He looked at VYR with dead eyes. They do not have rules. They have the Geneva checklist. I heard them joking about it. They weaponized their own atmosphere. They lured our dropships into a storm cell, a hurricane. Our sensors were blinded. Our stabilizers failed. And while we were tumbling in the wind, they flew into the storm. They hunted us in the lightning. But their technology, VYR insisted, desperate for a logical weakness. It is primitive. Kinetic slugs. Combustion engines. How can stones defeat plasma? Yes, Grum nodded. Primitive. Brutal. Efficient. Our shields are designed to disperse energy frequencies. Lasers. Plasma. Radiation. Do you know what happens when a kinetic tungsten rod traveling at Mach 7 hits an energy shield? VYR stayed silent. The shield does not disperse it, Grum said. The shield becomes the hammer. The kinetic energy transfers through the field. It turned the crews of our scout ships into paste without even breaching the hull. Physics, Chancellor. We forgot the first law of motion. An object in motion stays in motion until it hits a Kravash face. Grum slumped back, exhausted by the recounting. They took my ship, Chancellor. The World Breaker. They didn't destroy it. They boarded it. They gassed the crew. And then, I saw their engineers. They were swarming over the warp core. They were stripping the safety limiters. They were welding human guns to the hull. He closed his eyes, tears of blue blood leaking from them. They are coming. And they are driving my ship. While the Galactic Synod debated the philosophy of fear, humanity was busy doing what it does best. Taking things apart and putting them back together in ways that would void the warranty. Admiral Sarah Sterling walked along the gantries of the underground hangar Bay 4. Below her lay the cannibalized remains of the alien invasion fleet. It was a graveyard of elegant bioships and crystalline cruisers. But the humans weren't mourning. They were welding. Walking beside her was Dr. Elias Thorne, head of the Xenotechnology Division. He looked like a man who had consumed nothing but caffeine and ambition for a week. His lab coat was stained with grease and alien ichor. Report, Doctor, Sterling barked, her voice cutting through the noise of a plasma torch. Well, Admiral, Thorne grinned, tapping a rugged tablet. The alien tech is polite. That's the best word for it. Their FTL drives have 17 safety interlocks to prevent time dilation, radiation leaks, and uncomfortable turbulence. And we ripped them all out, Thorne said proudly. Turns out, if you bypass the navigational safety buffer and route the coolant directly into the injection manifold, you can squeeze another 300% output from the engine. It runs a little hot, might melt the paint, but she moves. They stopped in front of a massive ship. It was the World Breaker but changed. The sleek, purple alien curves were now marred by bolted-on plates of ugly, gray human armor. Massive railgun turrets, looking like skyscrapers turned sideways, were welded to the dorsal spine. It looked like a luxury sedan that had been turned into a tank. We call it the USS Indomitable, Thorne said. We kept their gravity drive, but we reversed the polarity on the shield generators. Why? Sterling asked, eyeing the monstrosity. Because, Thorne's eyes gleamed with reckless science, if you project the shield inward instead of outward, you create a containment field. We can use it to channel a directed nuclear explosion out the back. We essentially built an Orion drive using their shields as the combustion chamber. Is it safe? God no, Thorne laughed. It's a flying bomb. But it's fast. We can reach the Alpha Centauri jump gate in 4 hours. Sterling nodded, looking at the weapon systems. And the guns. The aliens use energy weapons. Elegant. Clean, Thorne explained. But energy dissipates. It blooms over distance. So, we gutted their plasma cannons and replaced them with magnetic accelerators. Railguns. He pointed to the main battery. We are firing 500-pound ferrous slugs coated in Teflon. Muzzle velocity is 0.05 light speed. When that hits a target, it doesn't just penetrate. The kinetic transfer turns the target into a cloud of superheated gas. We aren't melting them, Admiral. We are deleting them from physics. Sterling smirked. And the stealth tech we recovered from that Zephyr probe? Ah, the Void Watchers, Thorn chuckled. Their cloaking tech bends light. Very clever. But it generates a massive heat signature if you look in the infrared. They assume no one looks in the infrared because their sensors are too advanced for thermal imaging. So we wrapped our ships in thermal blankets. Literally. Multi-layer insulation. Then we took their light-bending tech and inverted it to project background radiation. To their sensors, we don't look like a ship. We look like a glitch. A hole in the universe. Sterling looked down at the fleet. It was a Frankenstein armada. Ugly. Dangerous. Built by a species that evolved to survive ice ages and apex predators. They think we're primitives, Thorn, Sterling said softly. They think we're stuck in the mud. Let them think that, Thorn replied. Until the mud hits them at relativistic speeds. Prepare the fleet, Sterling ordered, turning on her heel. Phase 1 was survival. Phase 2 is eviction. The attack didn't start with an explosion. It didn't start with a declaration of war. It started with a playlist. The Unity Grid, the hive mind responsible for the Council's cyber defense, was the first to notice. Their representative, Node 7, floated in the center of the chamber, its liquid datasphere turning a sickly shade of green. Intrusion. Node 7 shrieked, its synthesized voice glitching. The psychic lattice, it is being flooded. Flooded with what? V-Wire shouted, his light pulsing erratically. Trojan horses? Logic bombs? Malware? No. Node 7 wailed. With garbage data. Nonsense. Chaotic imagery. Felines playing musical instruments. Repetitive auditory loops. Memes from the pre-atomic era. The main holographic screen of the council chamber flickered and was hijacked. It didn't show a threatening general. It showed a video of a human man in 1980s attire, dancing. The song, Never Gonna Give You Up, blasted through the council's high-fidelity speakers at maximum volume. What is this? The Ironclaw representative covered his audio receptors. Is this a sonic weapon? It is a Rick-roll, Node 7 stuttered. A primitive cognitive hazard. It creates a recursive loop in the logic centers. We cannot process the irony. The hive mind is fracturing. We cannot synchronize. While the collective writhed in digital agony, the real threat arrived. Thermal spikes. Kalen shouted from his sensor pod. Everywhere. They are decloaking inside the perimeter. Space around the council station shimmered. The human fleet didn't warp in from a distance. They had drifted in, engines cold, hidden by the inverted cloaks. They were point blank. The USS Indomitable appeared directly above the station's glass dome. Its massive railguns were already spun up, the magnetic coils glowing with lethal potential. The ship looked like a predator shark swimming among goldfish. Shields. V-Wire screamed. Raise the Aegis barrier. The golden energy shield of the station snapped into existence. It was a masterpiece of defense, capable of withstanding the heat of a supernova. Fire. Admiral Sterling's voice cut through the comms, cold and calm. The railguns didn't fire a beam. They coughed. A dull, heavy thump that vibrated through the vacuum. 3 tungsten rounds slammed into the Aegis barrier. According to Council physics, the energy should have been dispersed. But the kinetic mass was too high. The sheer momentum of the slugs punched through the energy field like a bullet through smoke. The shield shattered, overloading the generators in a cascade of sparks. The rounds didn't hit the station. They stopped, suspended by precision gravity brakes, inches from the glass dome of the grand chamber. The council looked up. 3 massive metal rods, glowing red-hot from friction, were hovering right above their heads. Engraved on the tip of each rod was a message in Latin. Si vis pacem para bellum. If you want peace, prepare for war. The music cut out. The Rickroll ended. The doors to the grand chamber slid open. Ambassador Julian Graves didn't look like a warrior. He looked like an accountant who had just found a tax error in his favor. He walked to the center of the room, the terrified alien delegates parting like the Red Sea. He stopped at the foot of V-Wire's dais. He looked up at the hovering tungsten rods outside the glass, then back at the High Chancellor. Afternoon, Graves said, adjusting his cufflinks. Sorry about the noise. We like a grand entrance. You. V-Wire stammered. You violated the sanctity of the Synod. You breached the Aegis. We knocked, Graves corrected. You just have a very expensive door. What do you want? V-Wire hissed, trying to summon dignity. Mercy? We will mobilize the sector fleets. We will burn your world. Graves sighed. He pulled a small remote from his pocket and clicked a button. The holographic map in the center of the room changed. It showed a live feed of a desolate, uninhabited moon in a nearby system. "We call this the Sir Isaac Newton maneuver," Graves said calmly. "See, you guys love your lasers. Pew pew. Very flashy. But lasers have no mass. We humans, we prefer mass." On the screen, a single human freighter, modified with a massive engine, accelerated toward the moon. It wasn't carrying explosives. It was carrying a dense core of iron. "This ship," Graves narrated, "is traveling at 10% the speed of light. It has no warhead. It doesn't need one." The ship impacted the moon. There was no fire cloud. There was a flash of pure white light as the kinetic energy was converted instantly into heat and shock. The crust of the moon rippled like water. A crater the size of a continent opened up in a split second. Cracks spider-webbed across the entire celestial body. Gravity failed. The moon shattered into a billion glowing fragments. The room was dead silent. The delegates stared at the screen in horror. They understood energy. They did not understand brute force on a planetary scale. "Force equals mass times acceleration," Graves said, pocketing the remote. "That was a warning shot. A pebble. We have bigger rocks." He looked around the room. "You invaded us because you thought we were weak. You thought that because we haven't mastered zero-point energy or telepathy, we were savages. You forgot that we spent 5,000 years figuring out how to kill each other with sticks and stones. We got really, really good at it." He stepped closer to VYR. "We don't want to rule you. Running a galaxy sounds exhausting. The paperwork alone would be a nightmare. But we are done being the victims. We are taking a seat at this table. And if we refuse?" VYR asked, his voice barely a whisper. Graves pointed up at the tungsten rods hovering inches from the glass. "Then I let Admiral Sterling finish her target practice. And trust me, she never misses." VYR looked at the shattered moon on the screen. He looked at the primitive humans who had cracked his shields, hacked his mind, and held a gun to the head of the galaxy. He realized the era of stagnation was over. The era of the space orcs had begun. "The chair." VYR swallowed, his light turning a submissive blue. "The chair recognizes the ambassador from Earth. They call us Deathworlders now. They treat us with a mix of horror and respect. We introduced them to coffee, which increased galactic productivity by 400%. We introduced the Kravash to rugby, they're undefeated. But mostly we introduced them to a simple truth. The universe is a dark forest. It's full of monsters. And now the monsters know. The humans are awake. And that is why you never poke the primate. If you enjoyed this story of kinetic diplomacy, destroy that like button like it's a moon. Subscribe for more tales from the Terran Empire, and check out the playlist on screen for more HFY goodness. What would you do if you were Ambassador Graves? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, keep your powder dry.